As usual, two main sections, one coin, one single cut. Let's do this. And we're gonna start with the NeoFS department this time. 3 NeoFS releases were made during the past 2 months, starting with the feature pack 0.45.0, then followed by 0.45.1, and, not surprisingly, followed by 0.45.2, which is the latest and greatest known to this point. The first one contains a lot of features that I have talked about previously, especially the Search v2 APIs that we are using now extensively. Then the next stabilization or patch release contains some metabase migration fixes, because for Search API to work correctly we had to change the metabase scheme, and this required data migration for storage nodes. And then the 0.2 release mostly focused on storage node connection management fixes, because we had some issues with how nodes were dealing with various disconnects, especially when nodes just disappeared or went down. So we think that overall this makes our networks more resilient and ready for various interruptions of various sorts. And just to note that while we are expanding NeoFS in its feature set, and while we are doing some fixes of various sorts, we are always also expanding the test suite that we have for NeoFS, and it has recently surpassed the 500 tests mark, so we have more tests than ever. If you haven't noticed, Mainnet NeoFS chain, that is the N3 sidechain that runs behind the NeoFS, is currently running with 1-second blocks. Testnet was switched to this setting some months ago. I have talked about it in the previous episode, and we have carefully watched for it for some time, for some months actually, before deciding that okay, it's all stable, runs fine, runs good, so we are ready to switch Mainnet to the same setting. Now Mainnet is running the same setting for some weeks already, it's all fine. Practically this means that any container level operations like creation, deletion or EACL management are much faster now. Even though we have just flushed quite a number of changes to the node with the recent releases, we already have even more of them in the queue, and by being in the queue I mean that we already have them merged to the master branch, so they are quite ready. It's not something that we will be developing for the next months. There we already have things like subsequent metabase optimizations, because we are currently reusing the indexes that were ended for Search v2 feature of the node for different purposes, for internal node purposes. We had quite a complex scheme of indexes before that, serving different areas of what storage node does, and currently many of them can be replaced with the indexes we have for search. And this greatly simplifies the metabase scheme we have, and we think this will make our node a bit less complex and more performant at the same time, because we will be using the same source of data for different purposes. Also, we are removing the NeoFS ID contract and NeoFS ID capability. Actually, I don't think you will miss that, because it was never fully supported. It was supported for some parts and not for the others. And while we are progressing with the Neo N3 account model development and support, we decided that NeoFS ID is no longer relevant and no longer needed for any purposes, so it's going to be dropped in with the next release. One of the other things that you probably won't be missing is the experimental 3 service that is removed currently from the node. It's going to be removed from the next release. It was always experimental. S3 Gateway have used it in the past for its purposes. It was an optimization essentially created some 3 years ago, and now we no longer need it. It was never enabled on testnet or mainnet, so basically I don't think you care about it much, but we do, because it was one of the components of the node, and we had to support it and do something. Well, we did something, we just removed it. And the next on our list is configuration improvements. We already have done some parts of this, and we have simplified short configurations, that is for storage node and also remove some of the deprecated things from the inner ring node. Overall, I think this simplifies the configurations we have. And also, we are currently dropping the Glagolitsa dependencies that we have in the naming scheme in some parts. So I think this will make our both Atom, inner ring, and nodes easier to use for everyone. But these are things already done and merged, so they are going to be easy to deliver. And currently we are working on write cache improvements, performance improvements for it. These are mostly done in code, but we are testing and fine-tuning it to get the best performance we can from it. We are also progressing with the N3 account support for Node, and this will be delivered in the next Node release. And not for the next release, but we will also soon be returning to the session token problem we have. Expect some improvements there as well. We have released a new SDK version, the RC13 of the SDK, and the changelog is huge there, but the main thing that happened is that we have finally dropped the NeoFS API Go repository dependency. This was adding some development and actually runtime overhead for no good reason, and also contributed a lot to the confusion developers had around using the NeoFS API, because many people just couldn't figure out what they should be using, either SDK or API Go, but we also said that you don't need anything but SDK, but what's the purpose of API Go? How do I import this? How do I do that? Or actually, people asked a lot of questions about it, and currently it's just gone. You no longer need it. All of the NeoSPCC projects were converted to using the additional APIs that we are currently providing from the SDK and all the updated types and things like that. So we know for sure that you can do anything you want to do with NeoFS using SDK only, just because all of the projects that NeoSPCC does currently are able to do to provide their functions using SDK only. If you are using any older version of SDK, or if you have any API Go imports in your repositories, please update to the latest SDK and drop the dependency to API Go. That's the way to go. That's the way we gonna support our Go interfaces in future as well, because this actually is a lot easier for us, and I think that also it's much easier for external developers to be updating this SDK only and not worrying about any other components that we have or not have. We have recently launched a tiny little website that allows you to generate and download a recently standardized, by the way, NEP32 format blockchain dumps for various networks like testnet, mainnet, and NeoFS testnet and mainnet as well. These are the block archives or chain dumps, whatever you call it, that are pretty reminiscent of what SyncNGD network provides, but they are at the same time are always up to date, and they are generated on the fly by the UI of this website, because it does not require any backend. The backend is a regular REST gateway, nothing else. We are using the containers, the NeoFS containers that we have for node synchronization that contain blocks, basically mainnet testnet and NeoFS mainnet testnet blocks that we have already anyway. So we decided that if we have this source of data for NeoGo already that can synchronize using NeoFS, then we can also quite easily provide the service for you as well. So archive fs neo.org, that's the way to go. And if you have any suggestions, problems, or want some enhancement for it, welcome to the respective GitHub repository. We have spent quite a lot of time developing S3 Gateway recently and improving it as well. The first version that was released is 0.35.0 that removed the tree service, the experimental tree service that I have talked about quite a lot in different situations, and that currently is dropped from the NeoFS node, as we remember. So it has removed using this service for object operations. it no longer required this for object puts, gets, deletes, things like that, but it still required it for some other operations. Now the version 0.36.0 that was released just recently in actually early April, this removes the need for this experimental tree service completely. It's no longer needed, there is no dependency, and this makes it possible to use this gateway on mainnet and testnet network. That was one of the requirements that was previously making the S3 gateway not usable for these networks. Currently that's not the case, but at the same time, please do not rely on it too much at this stage, because we are still testing it and we will be optimizing some of the things there that can potentially make some data to be incompatible with the new version of S3 gateway. I think that we will stabilize the scheme, the NeoFS object mapping to S3, or actually S3 object mapping to NeoFS. We will stabilize it in the next 2 months, and then we will have something that can be really used in production. We have not touched our REST gateway for about half a year now, because there was basically nothing to do there. It worked fine. But now we will be doing this to convert it to using the new Search v2 API, and also to provide new search capabilities that the Search API provides. Because we know that many projects are not using the NeoFS API directly, and actually we are expecting many, and I would say most of the projects, to not be using NeoFS API directly, or in using it via the REST gateway. So this feature, the new feature that we have with the search, is not generally available until we have it in the REST gateway. So that's one of the things that we are going to be solving soon, and this will make search usable for wider, scope of projects. Moving on to blockchain department. As promised in the previous episode, we have released NeoGo 0.108.0 in February, which brought some memory management improvements and some additional RPC APIs. And by the way, Ricardo and Eric, thank you for your contributions. And it was quickly followed by the 0.108.1 release, which was an urgent fix for testnet compatibility. What we currently have in the queue is improvements for session-based iterator expansion, and we are also progressing with the development of state synchronization mechanism using NeoFS. That's very different from the block synchronization from NeoFS and header fetching from NeoFS that are already implemented and actually can be used with the 0.108.0. So this means that we will be storing blockchain state at some heights in NeoFS and synchronizing this state without processing blocks, and in some cases even headers. This will make synchronization much faster, but this at this stage is going to be for test purposes only, because to do this properly and securely, we will need state root hashes in the N3 block headers. We currently don't have this, but I think eventually, as the protocol evolves and as we are to move past the 3.8 release of the C# node, we will add support for this field to headers and we'll be able to solve this. Currently, we are already developing this mechanism that's going to be relevant for network synchronization, especially for faster networks. And as we are expecting Mainnet to join this faster party pretty soon, because there is a plan for Mainnet to be a 3-second network, 3 seconds per block network, unlike its current 15 seconds. So as it's going to be, producing a lot more blocks, we will need these mechanisms for faster synchronization, because there is a huge difference in the networks between networks producing 2 million blocks per year and 10 million blocks per year. So that's what we are currently working on for NeoGo. As you probably already know, NeoX version with complete anti-MEV protection is live on testnet. which means that all of the things needed for this solution, which is not just the BFT, because the BFT part was made like half a year ago, quite a long time ago, but also transaction pools, encryption, decryption, key storage, and contracts, and all of the sharing and things like that. They're all integrated, they're all, tested, of course, initially tested. Now that we have testnet and we have just broader testing, and you can test it too if you'd like to. So all of the things are implemented and done, and will be moving towards mainnet. But this, of course, will take some time because, as I have said, the change set is pretty huge and the feature itself is, pretty complex. Also, as a side effect of this work, we have stable hashes on this network now, because we know that some people complained about the reorg problem that we had on NeoX networks, and we still have on mainnet. On testnet, this no longer is a problem. Solving this problem was really related to the AntiMEV feature development, because we needed different keys and different signatures to have these stable block hashes. But now it's all implemented, and as I have said, you can try it and check it on testnet. Just to remind you, the Bain Labs group that is behind the NeoX node development is a joint effort by AX Labs, NGD, and NeoSPCC. And it's not like NeoSPCC is doing these developments alone. I'm just telling about this because this particular feature required a lot of effort from NeoSPCC, both in development and testing and reviewing and many things. Now that it's done, I think we will have a bit more resources for other blockchain related things, both N3 and NeoX.